I'm a 17-year-old guy, currently living in Phoenix, Arizona. This incident took place around 6 months ago, on an overnight trip into the Superstition Mountains, which are about an hour drive east of Phoenix. I'm not going to specify the exact trail, because I've been doing this stuff long enough to realize what happens when you post stuff on the internet. Whether it's a good trail, abandoned mine, ghosts, or whatever it may be, people come flocking, and usually with a lot of trash and loud music. Anyway, this particular trail I was taking was an 8M loop through a canyon. Pretty simple in and out overnight trip. I planned to go with my friend, but at the last minute, he had to cancel, and I was left on my own. So, with a packed bag and a car ready to go, I decided to go on my own, not leaving the house on time and some trouble navigating rough forest roads. I didn't arrive to the trailhead until around 5:45, which for those of you who don't backpack, this is a very big no-no. I had about a 4-mile hike until I arrived at my planned camping spot, and it was getting dark fast. So I figured if I moved quick enough, I could get at least 2 to 3 meters in before I had to find a spot. This strategy left me hiking a very dark trail on my own, with about 15 miles of dirt road between me and everyone else. Hiking in the dark by itself is scary, especially for where I was, and being on my own. Eventually, it got so dark that I could only see where my headlamp was pointing, and that's when I figured I needed to stop and get a camp set up. With only using the headlamp as my light source and trying to move fast, I ended up in a less than ideal spot, but there were some burnt pieces of wood and the remains of a fire circle, so it looked like people had been there before, but definitely not recently. My first priority was to get a fire going. I scanned the area around me and was able to find some dry wood, and I got the fire going. I got my tarp set up and cracked open a can of chili mac I brought for myself and was very much looking forward to eating. I was feeling good. My camp was set up and my food was on the fire. The feeling of uneasiness from the hike-in had almost gone away, but it was still there. I guess a side effect of camping alone in a remote area. To fully understand what happened, I have to explain to you how my camp was set up. The site I picked was a small clearing surrounded by large pine trees, with a trail about 30 feet to my left. When you're in the woods and have a fire going, the fire casts a circle of light around it, and everything on the edge of that circle and past it are pitch black. I was sitting on the ground near my fire, eating my dinner, when a small rock about the size of a marble was thrown into my camp. I looked at the tiny rock in shock, as I was positive that I was the only person on this trail that night. I immediately turned my light on and towards the area where I'd seen the rock come from, but due to the density of the pine trees and brush, I could only see about 10 feet. I spent the next 15 minutes in disbelief as I scanned the treeline that surrounded me, searching for what or whoever had thrown that rock, not daring to stray too far from my fire that in hindsight offered me a false sense of security. After sitting back down and spending the rest of my time on high alert, I was able to convince myself that I'd somehow kicked the rock or it had fallen from a tree. I went to sleep that night, not expecting the pure terror that was about to unfold. I woke to the sound of rustling leaves, barely audible if you weren't listening for them, but they were there, still in a sleepy daze. I listened as the rustling of leaves got harder to hear, as I assumed they were moving away from me. I went to grab my handheld flashlight that I'd left next to me when I'd fallen asleep, but the more I looked, the more scared I got as I came to realize that it was no longer there. I stood up in my sleeping bag and ducked out of my tarp and looked around. I was able to see a light off in the woods. It couldn't have been more than 15 feet away. It was my flashlight, laying on the ground in a pile of leaves. This is one of the few moments in my life where I have almost my pants. The flashlight that I'd left sitting right next to me when I'd fallen asleep a few hours ago was now 15 feet away from me, past the treeline in the woods. I hurriedly slipped my boots on, clutching my knife in the other hand and keeping my head on a swivel. I weighed my options. Stay here and wait out the night, or attempt a 3-mile hike back to the car in the dark. I figured that whatever, or whoever was out there with me, was definitely going to have a better advantage. If I was out on the trail without light. So, I decided to stay at the camp and wait out the night there. Eventually, it came back. I could hear it walking through the woods. It was far off, but I could hear it. It sounded like someone leisurely walking by, like they were on a stroll without a care in the world. Sometimes it would walk too far away, and I would lose the sound of its steps. But then, an hour later, maybe 2, it would return, still faint as ever. This went on for about 3 or 4 hours, until I listened to the steps get closer and closer, until they were about 7 feet from me. At this point, the fire gotten very small, as I'd run out of wood from my pile. The footsteps stopped, and everything went totally silent. I sat there still for 2 hours, clutching a knife in my hand and prayed that I wouldn't hear anything else. I stayed like that until the sun cast enough light that I could see that I was alone in my campsite. I packed my things, and walked the 3 miles back down the trail I'd taken. I arrived at the empty dirt road where my car was parked, and nearly sprinted to it as I unlocked my Subaru and jumped in and drove, and I didn't stop until I put at least 20 miles between me and that place. I stopped at a gas station in Apache Junction 2 by a Red Bull, but mostly just to see or talk to another person. As I exited the store, I was able to read what was written in the dust on the back window of my car. "Sleep well," it said. A lot of weird things have happened to me on my various adventures through Arizona, but this is the weirdest and scariest by far, so I thought I'd share it. There is a seriously deranged person living in Superstition Mountains. Do yourself a favor and stay as far away from those mountains as you can. So, this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginia wilderness. I did a Google search and found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area, just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known, that has a pretty cool waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip for my journey. I was planning 3 days, 2 nights. I started on a part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to, as expected. As I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. There were no birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus, it had a good-size area to swim in, so, naturally, I stripped down to my skivvies and took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was a chill bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistle, the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it'll repeat whatever I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again, like I'd get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper-aware that again there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe and to get out of there. I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with my food was cut down, and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag. But I looked at the rope, and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bear footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind, I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from a road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance, and I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday, but it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end. And this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out of there. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance. So, I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with the whistling. I stood up and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up," and "What the do you want?" It stopped whistling and it was quiet for a moment. Then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded just like me, but distorted like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me. Then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around. I wished I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look. I only ran. Less than half a mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror in my face and asked if that was me that screamed, and they asked me if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided to not go down where I just came from. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back in my car, I drove to one of the park ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they'll send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot run right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the chill tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I have never driven so fast in my life. When I told my roommate why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." This happened about 4 years ago. For a bit of backstory, I'm from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in another country, but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city, which if you drove about an hour in any direction, would either lead to another city or beautiful nature. My friends and I decided to take my girlfriend to see some of this beautiful nature, and decided on a national park, about an hour and a half from where we lived. This place is definitely no sort of secret location. It's very well known, but there are a ton of different areas to it, all with different rural and windy roads taking you to the various areas of the park. We'd gone in 2 different cars, my friends in one, and my girlfriend and I in another, to have some time together. We finished out the day of hiking, and we were heading home down one of the less common roads. I remember seeing this really beat-up old 7 South sedan, with a Wild Dell-looking guy in the driver's seat, drive past us in the other direction. This wasn't uncommon, as there are a lot of smaller, less economically sound towns spattered around the area. But for some reason, him and his car stood out, and my girlfriend noticed it as well. About 200 meters further down the windy road, there was a pull-off area, just a semicircle of gravel you could pull off to look at the view towards the ocean. There was a camper van belonging to a company that mostly rented out. Colorful vans to backpackers parked there with a woman standing in front of it. As soon as she sees us, she jumps out onto the road and flags us down. Now, I've read enough of these subs to know pulling in to help her on a quiet road I'd not be the safest idea, but back then, I hadn't, and my friends were in the car directly behind us. Luckily, she wasn't the person I didn't want to meet. She was quite obviously upset and scared when we pulled in. I told my girlfriend to wait in the car, and I got out to speak to her. She was almost in tears. I can't remember where she was from, but it was a Central European country from memory, touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter. She told me her van had broken down and she pulled off there, then called the van company's assistance line and was waiting for help. By this time my friends had pulled in behind us, and a couple of them had come over to see what was up. Apparently, a scary man had driven past her a few times already, first time pulling over to offer to take her and her daughter to the nearest town for help. She'd thanked him and said no, and that she was waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left, but then kept driving past every 10 to 15 minutes in opposite directions, slowing down and looking at them, then driving off. She begged us to stay with her while she waited for the assistance vehicle, because the guy terrified her and her daughter. I agreed. My friends, being the awesome people they are, decided my girlfriend and I were enough, and they ditched us. Thanks, guys. We stayed with the woman for a little while before the car my girlfriend and I had seen earlier drove past kind of slowly, coming the opposite way we'd seen him the first time. As soon as he'd driven around the bend, the lady told us that was the scary man that she'd been seeing before we got there. This got my girlfriend and I to take her much more seriously after the feeling we got from this guy. Just seeing him on the road, a few minutes later, he came back from the other direction, and he pulled into the parking area. For a bit more context, I'm not an intimidating man. I'm tallish, but I have almost zero muscle and fairly soft features, so there's not at all intimidating. A terrified foreign woman, her tiny daughter, my girlfriend, who doesn't look that intimidating, but is tough as nails, parked off a quiet road in a rural location with a not-so-nice-looking guy pulling in to where we were. Great. He gets out and his redneck as hell, and definitely not friendly looking. No judgment on the redneck part. I come from a poor country town north of our city, and those are my people. But hopefully that sets a picture. He strolls over to us. At this point, I walk towards him to put myself between the girls and him. I have no idea where this bravery came from. I would definitely not describe myself as a brave person normally. He looks at the girls, then me, and asks if he can help. I tell him no, we're just waiting for the assistance vehicle, then say we've got it covered. He then says maybe he could stay and wait with the woman and her daughter, so that we don't have to. I tell him we're happy to stay and thank him, but, again, we've got it covered. He kind of just stood there for a while staring at all of us, not really saying anything, giving off really creepy vibes. After what seemed like forever, another car drove past us and looked out, but kept going. This seemed to startle him. He mumbled good luck and got in his car and drove off. We waited with this poor scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes. We ended up talking a lot, and hopefully we have made her opinions of Australians a bit brighter after the mega creep. Finally, the assistance vehicle arrived. A bigger guy who could definitely handle himself. I asked to see his ID and stuff to be safe, but he wasn't a car marked by the company. He had all the tools and definitely seemed legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text me when she was off safe. She was so grateful to us for staying with her for such a long time. It made me feel good that even if this guy was just a weirdo-looking awkward country guy that didn't mean any harm, it was really just trying to help. We had still made her feel more comfortable in a strange country. I don't think he was, and definitely believe he was up to no good, but you never know. I did get a message from her to say she was safe, so everything ended well. But creepy mountain guy, let's not meet again. I'm in my late 60s now. This happened many years ago. I'd worked for most of my life as a forest surveyor, the kind of job that keeps you deep in the backcountry. hiking remote timberlands with a clipboard, compass, and silence for company. Over time, I developed a private obsession, finding lost towns, not the ones on the tourist maps, the real ones. The settlements that had disappeared so completely. It was like they'd been swallowed whole by the land. Sometime in the late 9th South, I came across a strange reference in a 1910 freight ledger from a regional rail line. It listed a handful of grain shipments going out from a station I didn't recognize. Just a name and a code. I double-checked maps, county records, even property archives. Nothing. It wasn't a station anyone had heard of, not a town listed in any history book. It was just a shadow in a ledger. Last active in 1924. I tried twice to find it on my own. Failed both times. By then, the forests had reclaimed everything. Old logging roads were gone. The rail spur that had once connected the area was reduced to a patch of rusted nails and earth decompressions in the moss. On my third attempt, I brought my great-nephew. He was 13, sharp, grounded, respectful. I thought it might be good for him to spend a few days disconnected from the world, and I wouldn't mind help hauling gear. We hiked in over 2 days. The last trail we followed was barely that, more suggestion than path. But late on the second day, we found it. A shallow valley with 5 weathered buildings, 3 homes, a narrow wooden structure that might have been a school or chapel, and a single-room trading post. There were no roads, no recent signs of life. It was too remote, too well hidden. Everything was still. One of the homes looked like it had been left in a hurry. Furniture in place, a coat hanging by the door. Upstairs, a suitcase packed and left open on the bed. In the kitchen, a chair pushed back from the table, a plate and fork coated in a fine layer of dust and mold. They had felt interrupted, like someone had stood up in the middle of dinner and never came back. The store had a few cans left on the shelves, faded boxes of soap, a jar of candy that had turned into powder, hand-painted signs for rope and dried goods. My nephew pointed out that there was no cash box, no ledger, no safe, nothing of value, just the shell and the quiet dot. No birds, no insects, not even the usual forest sounds. I didn't notice at first. It was him who said it. Why is it so quiet? We stood there listening, and it was like the world had stopped outside the valley. Then we found the letter. It had slipped behind the cabinet in the store, sealed in a brittle envelope. I opened it, dated May 1924. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. The writer, someone named Walter, mentioned the loss of the elevator. No trains for weeks, and we can't stay any longer. Not after what's happened. There was one more. Lines scribbled sideways along the bottom margin. They started acting strange when the last train came. We should have left sooner. That night, we kept near the edge of the clearing. My nephew didn't sleep. Said he kept hearing footsteps in the woods. I told him it was just branches cracking, maybe a deer, but I didn't sleep either. At one point, I stepped away from the fire to relieve myself. The moon was out full and white. From the edge of the tree line, I could see all 5 buildings clearly, and for a split second, just a blink, I could have sworn there was someone standing in the doorway of the farthest house. A tall, still figure like a shadow that hadn't moved with the wind. When I blinked again, it was gone. I didn't mention it to the boy. We left first thing the next morning. We tried to go back a year later. Same trailhead, same direction, nothing. The clearing was gone or covered, or had never been where we thought. Logging companies had moved through and everything had shifted. We spent 3 days searching. I never found it again. I still have the photos from that first trip, but they're off, blurry, foggy, distorted, like they were taken through old glass. You can tell there are buildings, but they look warped somehow, as if the place didn't want to be captured properly. I've looked for more references in the years since. The name from the ledger doesn't show up in any official state record. It's not in the National Archives. That stretch of rail was torn up in the 30s, and the company went bankrupt by 41. It's like that place, and whatever happened there was scrubbed clean. My nephew still remembers it. We talked about it a few months ago. He said, I don't think we were supposed to find it, and I think he's right. Some towns die, some are erased, but some, just a few, are left behind on purpose. This happened in 2017, but I still think about it way too often. I've only ever told a few friends, because I know how it sounds, and because I don't really want to think too hard about what might have happened if we'd stayed the night. For context, I used to be a pretty avid backpacker. I've done a lot of trails in the western US, but this story takes place during a trip to the Olympic National Park in Washington. My friend Chris and I were doing a 5-day loop, mostly off-road, using a series of primitive shelters marked along the route. If you've ever hiked the Olympic backcountry, you know it's dense, moss-covered trees, minimal sunlight, even at midday, and a weird, persistent silence broken only by distant water or the occasional crow. We were maybe 3 days in deep in the whole rainforest when this happened. It was late afternoon when we reached one of the trail shelters, basically a 3-sided wooden lean-to with a raised roof and floor. These are pretty common in remote hiking areas, and usually have a metal box with a logbook inside so hikers can sign in, leave notes, weather warnings, whatever. We'd planned to stay there for the night. It was the only structure for miles, and we hadn't seen another person in over 24 hours. The second we stepped up onto the platform, I knew something felt wrong. There was no obvious sign of trouble, nothing damaged, no gear left behind. But the moment I ducked inside, I felt it in my chest, that low buzz of unease that you can't quite name. Chris felt it, too. He stopped halfway through unpacking and said, "You getting a weird vibe? Or is it just me?" Definitely not just him. Still, we chopped it up to fatigue, or maybe just the heavy atmosphere of the place. The shelter faced a small clearing with a fire ring and a log bench, and behind it the forest just swallowed everything. Thick green walls of moss and trees. No real visibility past 15 or 20 feet. I went to check the logbook. Standard spiral-bound journal in a rusted ammo box. I opened it expecting entries about trail conditions or someone's dump doodles. Most of the entries were normal. 912. Rainy trail, muddy heading south. No bear sightings. 910. Stayed here with the dog. Quiet night. Firewood low. 98. Storm came in fast. Shelter held up fine. But the last one, dated the day before, was different. Scrolled hastily in heavy pencil across a single line, it said, "He followed me here. That's it. No date, no name, no follow-up, no next entry." I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I even flipped a few pages forward to make sure I hadn't missed a second part. Nothing. Chris saw my face and asked, "What's it say?" I handed it over. He read it, closed the book, and very calmly said, "We're not sleeping here. Now. We're not the paranoid type. We've camped in places with bear tracks, heard wolves howling nearby, even had a guy try to rob us once near Flagstaff. But this was different. This wasn't fear of wildlife or some tangible threat. This was the feeling of being watched, and we couldn't shake it. We decided to push on, even though the sun was starting to dip. According to the map, there was a riverside clearing, about 1.5 miles ahead. No shelter, but enough space to pitch our tent. We packed fast, and left the logbook exactly where we found it. As we walked, the forest got darker, in a way that it does when everything's soaking up the light. We kept hearing soft cracks behind us, twigs snapping, branches shifting. Every time we stopped to listen, it stopped, too. Eventually, Chris muttered, "I don't think we're alone." I didn't say anything because I agreed. We made it to the clearing just as the sky started turning dark blue. We didn't cook dinner, didn't start a fire, just set up the tent in silence. Both of us facing the tree line, listening. Nothing came out of the woods, but that didn't mean nothing was in them. I barely slept. Every rustle, Every breeze through the trees sounded like footsteps. I kept thinking about the way that sentence was written. Hurried, sharp. He followed me here. Not a bear, not someone following me. Just he, like the writer, assumed the reader would know. Who was he, and did he leave? The next morning, we packed up at dawn and booked it down the trail. No breakfast, no coffee. We passed 2 hikers going the other way around at 11 a.m., and I almost said something about the shelter. But I didn't want to sound insane. What was I going to tell them? Watch out for some guy in the woods who maybe followed someone a day before us. Instead, we warned them that the shelter felt off and that there were better camping spots ahead. They nodded and kept walking. I still wonder about them sometimes. If they made it out okay, if they stayed the night and saw or heard anything, if they added to the logbook. When we got back to the trailhead 2 days later, I stopped in at the ranger station to file a wildlife report. Standard procedure. Before leaving, I asked casually if anyone had mentioned anything strange near the Hobok Country Shelter. The ranger looked up and raised an eyebrow like, what? I just shrugged. Odd noises, weird vibe, that kind of thing. She hesitated, then said, "You're not the first to ask." She wouldn't say more than that. 4 months after we got home, I kept checking backpacking forums to see if anyone had mentioned that shelter or the logbook. Nothing. And then maybe 6 months later, I saw a thread buried in a forum for Pacific Northwest hikers where someone talked about finding a damaged logbook in a trail shelter near the Olympic coast. The entries had been torn out, but the last visible one said, "He's still out there." That was it. I didn't reply, didn't bookmark it. I wish I had, but I saw it, and it matched the handwriting in my memory. I haven't been back to that park since. I still hike, still camp, but I vet every shelter now. I carry a Garmin. I trust my gut, and I always read the logbooks, every single page. I've never posted on Reddit before, but I've looked for years, and I always read these creepy outdoors threads like it's my religion. This happened in 2021. I haven't told many people, mostly because saying it out loud somehow makes it feel less real, but it stuck with me ever since. This isn't a ghost story. Nothing supernatural. No Bigfoot. No skinwalkers. But I still get goosebumps when I think about it, because he was real. I saw him, heard him speak, and I have no idea what the hell he was doing out there. For some background, I live in the UK now, but I grew up in Oregon. Once spent most of my 20s hiking and wild camping all over the Cascades and parts of the Rockies. Solo trips were my thing. Not because I'm some kind of woodsman badass, but because I like the solitude. I do 3 to 5 day backpacking loops. Nothing too extreme. Usually sticking to marked but remote trails. This happened on a trip in the Walla Mountains, eastern Oregon. If you know them, you know it's a stunning area. Alpine lakes, high passes, wide open meadows, and very, very quiet. Even in peak season, some trails see almost no traffic. I planned a 4-day loop hitting several lakes, Android Lake, Chewett, and a few smaller ones deeper in. I started midweek to avoid weekend traffic. On day 3, I'd camped at a spot near an unnamed alpine tarn, about 9 miles from the trailhead. I hadn't seen a salt since day 1. It was late morning. Sun was high, sky clear, but still cool in the shade of the forest. I just packed up and was descending a switchback trail that led through thick pine before opening up into a wider ridge with panoramic views. A quiet morning, no wind or noise at all. I rounded a bend and saw a man coming toward me, maybe 100 feet ahead. Right away, I noticed something was off. He wasn't carrying anything, no pack, no water bottle, not even a day bag. He was barefoot in the walls on granite and dirt and shale, just shorts and a thin sweat-darkened t-shirt. I immediately stopped. When you're deep in the back country and you see another person, it's usually a relief. A nod, a good morning, sometimes even a brief chatter about trail conditions. But this guy? Something in me braced. I wasn't even scared yet, just alert. He kept walking toward me like nothing was unusual. We passed each other in one of the narrower parts of the trail. As he got close, I opened my mouth to ask, "Are you all right?" But he spoke first. He looked at me right in the eyes and said, "I'm almost done." That's it. No expression, no pause, just that. And he walked past me and kept going. His feet were filthy, cracked and bleeding at the heels, toenails broken. There were scratches on his shins like he'd been running through undergrowth. But he didn't look panicked or hurt, just empty, hollow. His face wasn't gone, but there was something about it that looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken, skin drawn tight, like he'd been out there too long. But it's his voice that stuck with me. Not tired, not relieved, just flat. No inflection, like he was stating a fact. "I'm almost done." I turned to watch him as he walked away. He didn't turn back. I debated turning around, and honestly, for a solid minute, I stood there trying to decide if I should follow him, trying to figure out if he needed help. But here's the thing, I wasn't a beginner. I knew what it looked like when someone was in distress, lost, dehydrated, or mentally unwell. And this guy didn't look like any of those things. He looked like someone who had decided something, or maybe like someone who didn't belong out there to begin with. I don't know how else to describe it, but everything in my gut told me, do not go after him. So, I did it. I hiked out that day, instead of staying the extra night I'd planned. I didn't feel scared exactly, but I was shaken, unsettled in a way I'd never experienced before. On the trail back, I passed a couple in their 40s, heading in. I told them they might see another hiker coming out, described him briefly. Barefoot, no pack. They just frowned. "You sure he wasn't with someone?" the woman asked. I shook my head, definitely alone. We said goodbye and kept moving in opposite directions. I never found out if they saw him. When I got back to my car, I drove straight to the nearby ranger station. I felt dumb walking in and saying, "Hey, I saw a guy with no shoes on," but I needed to get it off of my chest. To their credit, the ranger I spoke to took me seriously. He wrote down what I saw, asked the usual questions: time, location, physical description. I mentioned the phrase, "I'm almost done." He looked at me and asked, did he sound like he wanted to end it all? I told him honestly, I don't know. He didn't sound like anything. The ranger said they'd sent someone to check the area in the morning. I never heard back. I've run through every scenario in my head. He was a trail runner who'd lost his gear and was trying to get out. But why barefoot? And where's the urgency? He was mentally ill, maybe schizophrenic, or in psychosis possible. But again, there was no agitation, no confusion. He was errantly calm. Maybe he was done with life, hiking out to disappear or die somewhere. It's the one that fits the best. But even that doesn't explain why someone would choose that trail, that remote barefoot. Or maybe he was just a guy who snapped. Whatever it was, I think I crossed paths with him at the very end of something. A breakdown, a long, slow unraveling. I think he meant what he said. He was almost done, and I truly hope he made it out. Or if that wasn't the plan, I hope he found what he was looking for. But the weirdest part, you'd think the creepiest thing was seeing him, or the blood on his feet, or the dead look in his eyes. But what I remember most vividly was the moment after. He passed me when I realized I hadn't heard him approaching at all. No footsteps, no snapping twigs, just silence, until I looked up, and there he was. That, and the quiet certainty in his voice. This happened back in 2018, but it still feels like it just happened yesterday. I've been reading a lot of hiking stories lately, and figured it was time to tell mine. Maybe someone else has had a similar experience. Back then, I just turned 30. I was single, in decent shape, and had gotten into solo hiking as a way to clear my head. Nothing too extreme, just long day hikes. usually in the Lake District. But in 2018, I decided to go bigger. I booked a week off work, packed up my gear, and headed to Scotland to hike a stretch of the Great Glen Way. I was doing it alone, not uncommon, especially in late summer, when the trail's busy enough to feel safe, but also quiet enough to feel like you're really out there. The weird thing didn't happen on the Great Glen Way, though it happened when I strayed off of it. It was the fourth day of the hike. I'd left my accommodation near Loch Ness in the morning and made a really good time. The weather was perfect, overcast but dry, mid-teens Celsius, barely any wind. One of those Scottish days that feels like the wind's holding its breath. I'd reached my planned stopping point by 300 p.m., but I wasn't tired and had plenty of daylight left. There was a forest track leading off to the right, marked only by a weathered wooden gate and a no-vehicle sign. I checked my OS map and saw that it led to an old fire road that looped back around to the main trail. It would add maybe 2 hours to my route. I figured, why not? Famous last words. At first, the detour was lovely. No one else around, just thick pine woods and a soft crunch of gravel under my boots. The trees were dense, but the path was clear. An old forestry road with ruts and overgrowth, but nothing difficult. I remember it being very quiet. No bird song, no wind, just my footsteps and the occasional creak of branches. About 40 minutes in, I noticed a change. It wasn't anything obvious, just a shift in the mood, if that makes sense. The trees got denser, taller, the light thinner. The air smelled different, less fresh pine, more damp moss, and something faintly sour, like wet stone. I started to feel observed, not in a dramatic horror movie way, more like I'd walked into a room where someone had just stopped talking. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then I saw the man. He was maybe 30 feet off the trail between the trees. I almost missed him. He was standing completely still, just there like a statue, head slightly tilted downward, facing away from me. He looked like he was watching something on the forest floor, or listening, or maybe thinking. I stopped walking instinctively. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there. I called out, "Hey, mate, you all right?" No answer. Now, I'm not the kind of person who gets spooked easily. I've helped injured hikers before, talked to people wild, camping, off trail. There are all sorts of reasons someone might be in the woods. But there was something about the way this guy was standing that immediately put me on edge. He wasn't leaning or crouched. He was perfectly upright, arms at his sides, feet together, like he'd been planted there. His clothes were plain. A dark green jacket, brown trousers, nothing flashy, no gear, no bag, no visible reason to be that far out in the trees. He didn't acknowledge me at all. I took a step closer and repeated louder, "You okay, man?" Nothing, not even a flicker. He didn't turn, didn't nod, didn't even shift his weight, and that's when I felt it. That gut-deep animal sense that something was wrong. You know how your brain starts to explain things, even when your instincts are screaming. Mine was doing that in overdrive. Maybe he was hard of hearing. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was, I don't know, meditating. It all felt ridiculous, even as I thought it. I stopped moving, backed up a step, and that's when he tilted his head just a little. Just enough to let me know he'd heard me. He still didn't turn around, but that was enough. I backed away slowly, then turned and walked. Not fast. I didn't want to spook him, but steady, focused. Phone in hand. No signal, of course. Eyes on the trail, ears turned for any sound behind me. I never heard footsteps. I didn't stop until I hit a fork in the track and got back to a more open, visible stretch of trail. I didn't see him again. Never heard anything behind me. I rejoined the Great Glen Way about an hour later, rattled but trying to act normal. I told myself he was just a weird hiker, or someone dealing with mental health issues, or maybe just messing with me. But even as I thought that, I knew better. That wasn't just someone being weird. That was someone standing still for far too long in a place that made no sense. Completely unresponsive until I was about to leave, and then showing me just enough that he knew I was there. Like it was a performance, or a warning. I spent that night at a bobby, where I met a friendly older walker from Edinburgh who knew the trails better than me. I ended up telling him about the strange encounter. He asked where it happened. I showed him on the map. He made a face and then, he said, "I have heard things about that area. Forestry land, old hunting estate. They say there's stuff buried out there. World War II training grounds or bunkers, things they never cleared. Places not on the official maps." I laughed it off, but he didn't. He just said, "Some folks say there are corners of these woods where people disappear. Not all at once. Just stop being seen." That was the end of the conversation. I finished the hike, didn't take any more detours, kept on the trail. I carried a torch at all times. I never saw anyone else like that. Never felt that way again. Like I was being studied, measured, and deemed not worth responding to. I still hike, still love the solitude, but I've never gone back to that part of the trail. I even looked at a satellite map recently to try and find that fire road. It's there, faint, overgrown. It doesn't show up on most trail maps. It just vanishes into a dense patch of forest. I don't think I want to know what's at the end of it. This happened a couple of summers ago while I was solo hiking in Sweden. Just minding my own business, trying to unplug from city life and clear my head. Sweden has these awesome little three-sided wooden shelters scattered along hiking trails, and they're free to use. Really chilled out anyway. I've been walking all day. My legs were toast, and I came across one of these shelters near a lake, deep in the forest. Perfect spot. It was quiet, beautiful. The whole area smelled like pine and moss. I set up my sleeping bag inside, threw my backpack under my head, and just listened to the trees creaking and the birds doing their thing. It was getting late, like around 11 p.m., still kind of light out, because Swedish summers are weird like that. Long-ass twilight. I was drifting off when I heard footsteps come down the trail. Not animals, people. 3 of them showed up. 2 men and a woman, middle-aged, looked like serious hikers or locals, all wearing those bright neon safety vests, like they were on some kind of mission. One of the guys comes up to the shelter with a flashlight and just kind of stares at me. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I sat up, trying not to look like a deer caught in headlights. Camping, just hiking. Through. He nodded slowly, still kind of eyeing me like I was doing something shady. Then the woman spoke up. "There have been some strange people around here. We're part of a neighborhood watch, just making sure everyone's safe." Strange people. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Definitely what I wanted to hear, right before sleeping alone in the woods. She explained that someone had gone missing a couple of weeks earlier, a guy who was camping not far from here. They found his tent and stuff, but no trace of him. He was just gone. Apparently, some locals had also reported seeing a weird man hanging around the lake. Not a hiker, not a local, just some creepy lurker guy. They didn't stay long. Gave me that. "You do you, but we warned you. Look," and headed off down the trail with their flashlights bouncing. So now I'm lying there wide awake, staring into the trees like they're going to sprout arms and grab me. I tried to chill, told myself it was probably just locals being extra cautious. I mean, I've done solo hikes before. People get weird about it. Eventually, I dozed off, and then, at around 1 or 2 a.m., dead in the middle of the night, I woke up again. No sound woke me up. It was more like this sudden feeling that something was off. You know when your brain starts pinging danger, but you can't figure out why? I kept still and listened. Footsteps, soft, slow ones, coming from the direction of the lake. I sat up a bit, trying not to make a sound. The moon was really bright that night, like almost full moon bright, and everything was lit up in a silver blue. I saw movement between the trees, and out walks this old guy, alone, naked. I'm not joking. No shirt, no pants, not even socks. Just full grandpa mode, letting it all hang out, pale skin glowing in the moonlight. I swear it looked like something out of a dream or a really specific nightmare. He wasn't drunk or stumbling. He just walked with this weird loose limp shuffle, like he didn't quite know how to move his body. His head was tilted slightly, and he was muttering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words. At first, I thought he hadn't seen me, but then he turned and we locked eyes. I cannot stress enough how uncomfortable that moment was. I was halfway out of my sleeping bag, frozen in place. The guy just stared at me, totally unfazed, that he was buck naked in the middle of the woods. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was disappointed, like I'd crashed his party or broken some unspoken forest rule. We stared at each other for what felt like a full minute. Then, without a word, he turned around and slowly walked back into the woods, his saggy ass disappearing into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in my sleeping bag with my camping knife clutched in my hand like it was going to do anything. At first light, I was out. I packed up in like 3 minutes. I didn't even stop to make coffee. I practically ran back to the nearest village. I told a ranger about it later that day. I figured he'd laugh at me or tell me I was overreacting. Instead, he just nodded and said, "Yeah, people have seen him before." "Sorry, what?" he said. "There have been a bunch of reports over the years. Strange men, naked or half-naked, seen wandering the woods at night near the lake. Sometimes staring, sometimes talking to themselves. One hiker claimed the guy tried to lead him somewhere. Another one said he disappeared into the lake without leaving a ripple." I asked if they ever found the missing camper. The ranger shook his head. "I haven't been back to that part of Sweden since. I still love hiking, but I've become a lot more picky about where I sleep. No more 3-sided shelters. I want 4 walls, man, doors, locks. So yeah, next time someone tells you the forest is peaceful and healing, just remember it could contain moonlight wiener-waving forest ghouls who will judge your life choices with their cold, haunted eyes." Happy camping. This happened a couple of years ago in the summer of 2021. For context, I live in Salt Lake City and spent a lot of time outdoors. Day hikes, backpacking, winter camping, you name it. I've been in some strange situations before, but nothing like this. This one stuck with me in a way I still don't totally understand. It was a weekend trip in late July. My friend Wes and I had planned a tight backpacking loop in the Wentis, starting from the Crystal Lake trailhead, heading up to Long Lake, and then following the less traveled loop past West Lake and down through some smaller ponds. Not totally off-grid, but far enough to avoid crowds. We both had plenty of backcountry experience. I was 31 at the time. Wes was 29. We had bear spray, a Garmin in reach, topo maps, and decent weather, blue skies, mid-70s during the day, and maybe low 40s at night. Pretty much perfect. We set off Saturday morning, hiked in about 6 miles, and set up camp near a small, unnamed lake that didn't show up on most trail maps, but was clearly visible on USGS maps. No other tents in sight, which is rare out there, even in the less popular areas. Honestly, we were stoked about that. We ate dinner, freeze-dried chili, and instant mashed potatoes. We watched the sky go orange and purple and turned in at around 10:30. I remember how clear the stars were that night. It was dead quiet. No wind, just stillness in the air. That changed at around 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly, like my body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. At first I thought I'd heard a coyote or maybe a fox, but it didn't sound right. It wasn't the short yip or bark I was used to hearing from coyotes. This was a scream, and it sounded human. I sat up in my tent and listened. About 30 seconds later, I heard it again. Loud, sharp, definitely female sounding, but weirdly strained, like someone trying to scream through a sore throat. It echoed off the trees and across the lake. Wes unzipped his tent and whispered, "Dude, are you hearing this?" "Yeah," I said. "You think it's an animal?" We listened. Exactly 30 seconds later, another scream. Same sound, same intensity, no movement, no variation. It wasn't getting closer or further away. It wasn't circling. It wasn't natural. Wes said, "That's not an animal. No way." And I agreed. We got out of our tents, but kept our headlamps off. The moon was bright enough that we could see the tree line. The sound was coming from the other side of the lake, but the trees made it impossible to see anything. We stood there in the dark, barely breathing as the scream came again, sharp and blood-curdling. Exactly 30 seconds later, it was like a broken record, playing over and over, every 30 seconds on the dot. We tried calling out, "Hello, is someone okay?" But no response. Just the scream again, louder and more desperate this time. We stayed frozen for what felt like forever, maybe 45 minutes, until the screaming suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Neither of us slept again. We packed up as quickly as we could before dawn, eating cold jerky and granola bars. By first light, we were hiking back out, still shaken and glancing over our shoulders the entire way. We told the ranger at the trailhead what happened. He didn't look surprised. He said, "You're not the first to report that. People hear the scream every year or so, usually around the same time, late summer, early morning. No one ever finds the source. We checked the area multiple times, but it's like it disappears." He shrugged and added, "Sounds like someone trying to imitate a person." We left it at that. To this day, I have tried to come up with a rational explanation. Was it an animal? Maybe. Mountain lions, bobcats, or foxes can make some weird sounds, but the timing and pitch were just wrong. Was it a prank? No one was out there but us, and we heard it from different spots around camp. Was it someone hurt? We never found footprints or signs of a person. I've never been so unnerved in the wilderness. If you've heard something like this in the Wentus, or anywhere else, please share. I want to know that I'm not crazy. This happened a few years ago, and I still don't know how I didn't get mauled. I was camping in Great Smoky Mountains National Park with my partner Jess, and even though we both grew up in pretty cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods, we figured we were totally capable of handling a backcountry trip. Spoiler, we were not. Or, rather, I was not. It was early fall, that sweet spot where the leaves are starting to change, but it's not freezing yet, and we'd been hiking around the park for a couple of days. Nothing extreme, some easy trails, car camping, eating terrible trail mix, and occasionally arguing over the map. Neither of us had much real wildlife experience besides yelling at possums, or doing the awkward walk around a goose blocking a sidewalk. We'd watched a couple of bear safety videos, had a can of bear spray neither of us had ever actually used, and for the most part, we kept food stored properly. Mostly, we were definitely not seasoned campers, but we were enthusiastic amateurs. The most dangerous part of the trip so far had been Jess almost face-planting into a stream trying to take a selfie. So on our third night, we roll into this cozy, really quiet campsite, tucked away a bit from the road. Not us all around, just woods, misty hills, and that, wow, we really could die out here, and no one would know kind of solitude. We set up the tent, stack firewood, and I'm in full dopamine mode because we'd saved some steaks for that night. Our little backwoods gourmet moment. We made one fatal mistake. We left the cooler next to the picnic table. We should have thrown it in the car or bear box, no question. But we were tired, hungry, and just wanted to walk down to the scenic little stream for golden hour photos. I figured we'd only be gone for 20 minutes. I told myself, it's fine, it's fall. Bears are probably asleep, or whatever. They are not. We hike down. It's pretty. The light is all orangey and perfect. We come back up the trail, maybe 30 minutes later, and bam, there it is. A bear, not a grizzly. Thank God we're not out west, but a solid, shaggy black bear, just vibing in our camp like it owned the place. Snapped in the air, nosing around the cooler. Didn't seem aggressive, but it sure as hell wasn't scared of us either. It was just chilling, checking out the menu. My brain basically crashed. Error 404. Bear response not found. Jess freezes. Hi freeze. I've got this tiny camp axe in my hand. I've been using it to split some damp wood before we left, and that's literally it. No spray, no noise, just me, Jess, and one bear. And instead of remembering any of the actual bear safety advice, like stay calm or back away slowly, my brain decides to focus on one thing, not the stakes. So, like a certified idiot, I step forward and yell, "Hey, hey, get out of here." The bear doesn't care. It's still sniffing around the cooler, probably amused. I take 2 more steps. Jess is now whispers screaming behind me. "What are you doing?" I raise the axe like I'm about to make the dumbest decision of my life. And I do. I walk up and bunk the bear on the nose with the flat side of the hatchet. Not a swing, not an attack, just a very dumb, very firm tap. Like I was trying to reboot the bear with a software update. The bear jumps back maybe 3 feet. We lock eyes for a second. I swear we both had the same thought. What the actual hell just happened? Then it huffs. That weird snorty exhale that sounds half annoyed, half threatening. It turns around and ambles off into the trees like I just ruined its evening plans. No charge, no noise, just vibes disrupted. I stand there in stunned silence, max still in hand, heart trying to beat its way out of my ribs. Jess looks at me like I've just proposed robbing a bank. What the actual is wrong with you? Fair question. Very fair. We didn't see that bear again. I assume it told its friends about the weird, hairless raccoon that smacked it in the face and decided not to come back. We cleaned the cooler. Just a few muddy paw prints. Thankfully, nothing inside torn up. And yes, we cooked the steaks. I won't lie, every bit tasted like guilt and adrenaline. Later that evening, we found a ranger station down the road and reported the bear. I left out the eye, tapped it with an axe part, because, I like not being banned from federal land. The ranger didn't look surprised. "Yeah," he said, "they've been active lately. You're lucky it wasn't feeling bold. They usually don't want trouble, which, thanks for the reminder, man." Jess didn't let me live it down for the rest of the trip. Anytime I even look at the axe, she says, "You going to pick a fight, bear slayer?" Any rustle in the woods, she'll say, "You better go apologize to his cousin." She drew a dumb little cartoon of a bear with a band-aid on its nose in the corner of our map and labeled it Wounded Pride Estimated Location. I earned it. A few weeks later, I told the story to some friends, expecting full judgment, and got it, but they also lost it laughing. Now, it's one of those stories people make me retell at parties, and honestly, I still think about that exact moment all the time. Me holding that dumb axe like it meant something. Stepping up to a 200 pounds plus bear and just giving it a polite little no thanks tap on the nose. The sheer luck of it, like I was one bad mood away from getting swatted across the forest floor. If that bear had skipped breakfast or been nursing a grudge, I wouldn't be typing this. I'd be a cautionary sign nailed to a tree. What kills me is how calm the bear was about the whole thing. I didn't scare it. I just confused it like I'd messed up some invisible rules of the forest. This hairless bipedal creature really, with a glorified butter knife. And then, it just decided not to press charges, I guess. Probably out of pity. And yeah, it lives rent-free in my head. Not because I think I'm brave, far from it, but because it was the dumbest possible survival move that somehow miraculously didn't get me turned into forest fertilizer. So yeah, if you're ever camping and the Smokies, or honestly anywhere with bears, do not do what I did. I've spent a lot of time hunting and fishing, alone from my teenage years into my mid-20s. I'm no stranger to periods of isolation in the Appalachian Mountains, running through central Pennsylvania, or the woods of northern New York. However, there are certain times I'm overcome with feelings of anxiety, or just a flat-out feeling of I shouldn't be here. This has almost exclusively happened in areas densely populated by hardwood trees, cedar, pine trees, spruces, etc. It's happened when scouting, fishing, and at times hunting with a very big loaded firearm. It's not the same feeling you get when walking back to your truck after dusk with just a bow, 'cause New York hasn't approved your pistol permit yet. I can only describe it as a primal feeling of where I'm going isn't a good idea, and I need to leave. I have been stationed at a light infantry unit for the last 6 years as an 11 Bravo. If you're unfamiliar, light infantrymen, me, are allotted opportunities for courses and field trainings in areas such as cold weather survival, land navigation, fieldcraft, heavy cross-country backpacking, rocking, mountaineering, and other forms of wilderness survival. All things required to be effective in a field environment. This means a lot of time in the woods, and some of that time is alone. Never once have I had these intense sensations, as previously described, while training in a professional capacity. I'm not scared of the woods. I'm well aware of what can happen to a person if they are careless to their environment. I like to think I know what I'm doing, and I know what to do to keep myself in all right shape. I say all of this to say this. Last Monday, I was back out of a patch of pine trees, all the way back to my truck. By a feeling of intense dread and anxiety, I genuinely felt in that moment as if I was not supposed to be there. And if I continued forward, it would have meant some sort of bad news. This is a spot I've hunted before. The first time I met that same patch of trees with unease when passing through, but this time was too intense. I'm a religious individual, and to me, it felt like an intense evil was keeping an eye on me as I walked through its front yard. When this happens, it is consistently patches of tall hardwood trees that do this to me. I like to think of myself as not beaten by a particular species of trees native to the Northeast. But unfortunately, it has become a pattern of occurrence I can no longer ignore. Is there something wrong with me? Why is it the trees? Is it my mind warning me two things I just can't understand at that particular moment? Any sort of input is welcome. I'm going back out in a couple of hours to sit for turkey. If anything else happens, I suppose I'll update. A few years ago, I was hiking the southern portion of the Pacific Crest Trail in Washington State, USA. It was late June, so warm enough that water sources were valuable. I made camp toward the end of the day in a mildly used site. It was a few feet off the trail, but not deep into the woods. A babbling brook was about 50 feet away. As I was heating water on my tiny stove for dinner, an older, about 60-ish man walked down the trail. He saw me and hollered to ask if I had any water. I noticed that he was wearing regular clothes, jeans, sneakers, and a casual white button-down shirt. No pack. All odd. I was far enough down the trail, maybe 10 miles from any road, that a day hiker would have been extremely rare at that point. I welcomed him into my camp and gave him water from a jug. He drank it, thanked me, then walked on. I thought it was odd, and it stuck in my mind. The following week, I came off the trail to a nearby town and learned of a massive manhunt for a guy in his 60s wearing jeans, sneakers, and a casual white button-down shirt. He had abandoned his car near the PCT and was on the run from the feds for money laundering and other white-collar crimes. I never did learn if they found him. I often wonder how far he got with no gear, no food, and no water. A small part of me hopes he got away. This happened about 2 years ago in Montana. I think about it almost every day. I'm finally writing it out because the nightmares haven't stopped, and I feel like maybe putting it into words will help me sleep. We were camping in Glacier National Park. My wife and I had done tons of car camping and a few backpacking backpacking trips together before, but this was our first time in grizzly country. We were both pretty cautious by nature and did all the standard things. Bear spring, bear canister stored away from the site, cooking far from the tent, no scented items inside of the tent, all that. It was late August, and the weather had been dry and clear. Warm days, cold nights. We had 2 nights booked at this primitive campground. I won't say the exact one, but if you've been to Glacier, you'd probably know it if I did. It was small, only about 8 sites, spaced out a decent bit, but still within shouting distance. The first night was uneventful. I remember sitting out by the fire with my wife, watching stars, feeling that surreal calm that only comes with being miles away from cell service and roads. No light pollution, no noise but wind in the trees, and the occasional distant howl or hoot. One of the other campers came over at one point to say hi. An older woman, probably in her 60s, solo camping. We made small talk. She said she was retired and traveling the country in her Subaru, camping at every national park she could hit. A really friendly lady. She was staying in the site one over from us, maybe 40 to 50 feet through the trees. I remember her saying how peaceful it was out there, how she hadn't seen a single bear the whole trip. That was the last thing she ever said to us. Around 3 a.m., the second night, I woke up suddenly. You know that feeling when something just feels wrong before you're even conscious of it. That was what jolted me awake. My wife was still asleep, breathing softly beside me. Then I heard it shouting a man's voice, urgent, coming closer. Get in. Your car. Everyone get in your car right now. I sat bolt upright. Her voice was getting louder, closer, shouting the same thing on repeat. It wasn't panicked exactly, but forceful, trained. My heart started pounding. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. A flashlight beam swept past our sight. A man in the ranger uniform was moving quickly from site to site, banging on cars, yelling, "Do not stay in your tents. Get in your vehicle. There's a bear in the area. A grizzly. Get in your vehicle." I didn't even stop to think. I grabbed. My wife shook her awake. She was groggy and confused, but sat up fast when she saw my face. "We need to go now." "Bear," I said, already pulling on my boots. She didn't ask questions. We didn't bother packing anything. We just ran, clutching our headlamps and keys. The walk from the tent to the car was maybe 50 feet, but it felt like miles. Every shadow looked like something moving. Every snap of a twig made my skin crawl. We got in, locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad, I couldn't get the keys in. The ignition. I saw other cars turning on, people inside, some with lights on, some still in the dark. The ranger was still moving through the camp. Then he stopped at the site next to ours. The woman's tent. Our car was there, but no movement, no lights. I saw the ranger stand still for a beat too long. Then he unholstered his sidearm. Something in my stomach dropped. I watched through our windshield as he called in on his radio, with a fast but low voice. Another ranger vehicle pulled up maybe a minute later. Lights off. Silent. A woman got out, also a ranger, and they both approached the tent. The rest is kind of a blur. I remember watching them unzip the tent slowly. I couldn't see much from where we were, but I heard something I'll never forget. The female ranger made a noise. Not quite a scream, just this involuntary gasp, like all the air escaped her lungs. Then she turned away and bent over. I think she was throwing up. We found out the next day that the woman, the same one who chatted with us the night before, had been killed in her sleep. A grizzly had torn open her tent and dragged her out. The rangers told us later it was probably over in seconds. She didn't even have time to reach for the bear spray. They found still clipped to her belt. They didn't find the bear until 2 days later, miles from the campsite. They tracked it by helicopter and ended up euthanizing it. The rest of that night was a mix of fear and adrenaline and this deep, raw horror that I still don't have the words for. We sat in the car, headlights off, watching the silhouettes of the rangers move through the trees. One came over eventually, a young guy who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He confirmed that there had been a fatality and that they were treating the whole area as an active danger zone. They were evacuating everyone. We needed to follow the convoy out in 30 minutes. We didn't sleep. Nobody did. In the days after the story made the news, you might have read about it. Solo camper killed a grisly attack in Glacier. They never released her name publicly, thank God, but we recognized the details. They also didn't mention in most reports that there were other campers literally feet away, that we heard the bear before we realized what it was. Low, heavy breathing, footsteps, the sound of nylon tearing. That part stays with me. I want to be clear, he did everything right. She did everything right. This wasn't about food left out or someone doing something careless. It was just one of those horrific freak things that happen in the wild. Sometimes predators don't act like we expect them to. Sometimes the worst case scenario just happens. I don't blame the rangers. They were incredibly professional, and you could see how much it affected them. But I do think the park downplayed the danger in the weeks after. There were reports of bear activity in the area before that night. Scratched trees, a couple of false charges, along trails. I wish they'd closed the campsite, but wishing doesn't do much. We haven't camped since. I think about her a lot. A stranger. Someone we talked to for maybe 5 minutes over a fire. I wonder what her last thoughts were, if she even woke up. But I hope not. I hope it was fast. This happened back in 2009, but it still lives rent-free in my head. I've told a few friends in person over the years, but I've never written it down before. Back then, I was 22 and doing a long-distance hiking trip with 2 mates. Our plan was to take on a big chunk of the Pennon Way, just over 150 miles from the Peak District up into Northland. We weren't purists about it, weren't doing every single mile, but we were out there for 2 weeks, camping as much as possible to save money. The incident happened somewhere between the Yorkshire Dales and North Panadas. I won't give the exact grid reference, because frankly, I don't want anyone poking around and getting themselves into trouble. It was late August, that odd end of summer period where the sun hangs around late, but the shadows feel longer. We'd spent the day on a brutal section of trail, foggy terrain, sheep tracks pretending to be paths, and a stiff wind that somehow managed to hit us in the face, regardless of which direction we were walking. We pitched up near a small copse on the edge of moorland, one of those semi-sheltered areas that's just enough cover to count as wild camping without being completely exposed to the elements. There was a stream nearby, some higher ground behind us, and critically flat land for tents. We got our kits sorted and had a quick boil in the back meal. One of my mates, Ryan, realized he'd lost his jacket somewhere along the previous stretch. Lightweight windbreaker, nothing fancy, but it had his wallet and train pass in it, so he was keen to go back. He asked if I'd come with. Then our third guy stayed behind to keep the fire going and prep some tea. So off we went, retracing our steps as best as we could. We never found the jacket. After an hour of searching, Ryan gave up and turned back. I stuck around for a bit longer, half out of stubbornness, half enjoying the solitude. I've always liked that feeling you get on the trail. No signal, no traffic, just your boots and breath, and the world pressing in close. But it was getting dark fast, and in classic unprepared fashion, I didn't have a proper torch with me. This was back before smartphones had flashlight apps, so I was using the glow of my old HTC screen to light the way. It barely lit more than a few feet, but it was enough to follow the trampled grass path and not fall into a bog. I was about 15 minutes from camp when I saw them. 2 men standing in a clearing just off the trail. They hadn't seen me yet, so I froze behind a thin cluster of trees. I don't know why I ducked down. Instinct, maybe something felt off. The 2 of them were standing over a hole, A proper one, deep, rectangular, fresh. You could see the wet soil piled up beside it. They had 2 spades and were maneuvering something large and metallic toward the edge. It made a clanging sound as it scraped against the edge of the hole. That's what first struck me, how loud and wrong the sound was, echoing in the quiet woods. Whatever they were burying wasn't a person. I'm fairly sure of that. The way they moved. The noise it made. It was solid, industrial, like a machine or heavy container. They got into the hole and stood there for a few seconds. One of them said something I couldn't make out. It was low, deliberate, not a chat, not small talk, more like a declaration, a sentence with weight to it. The second guy nodded. Then they started filling in the hole. They weren't rushing, no panic, just focused, like they were doing something they'd done before. I stayed crouched, barely breathing. My phone screen dimmed. They didn't look like hikers, no rucksacks, no trail clothes. One was wearing jeans and a dark fleece, and the other in old work trousers and a hoodie. They both wore gloves. They didn't look up once. Eventually, they finished the job, smoothed the earth. One of them lit a cigarette and stood there for a moment, just staring at the ground. Then, as casually as you like, they picked up the shovels and walked off in the opposite direction, deeper into the woods. I didn't move until I was sure they were gone. Then I ran. I didn't even try to find the trail again. I just ran, crashing, through the underbrush, half blind with adrenaline and that primal sense of you were never meant to see that. I must have looked insane when I burst back into camp. Ryan and Dan both jumped when I showed up. I told them what I'd seen. Probably too fast and too jumbled to make proper sense. They laughed at first, said maybe it was someone burying an old fridge or scrap metal or some stolen gear, but I couldn't shake it. That clank when it hit the bottom, the silence afterward, the way they stood over it like they were giving it a funeral. That night I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing twigs snap outside the tent. It could have been deer. It could have been nothing. It could have been then. We moved on the next morning, cutting the trip short by a day. Not because of what I saw officially. We told ourselves we were just tired. Weather was turning, but I think they could feel it too. The weirdness. A few days later, while resupplying in a village near Elston, I got chatting with an older guy behind the till at the general store. Friendly sort, when I mentioned we've been camping near a particular wood just off the trail. His smile dipped, slightly. He didn't say much, but he said this. Yeah, some places on the way have long memories. You'll hear stories. Best to keep moving through. That's all he said. Then he rang up my oatcakes like nothing happened. When I got home, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole. Started Googling around about dumping grounds, military leftovers, urban legends around the Pennon Way. Did you know there were old Cold War listening stations and radar outposts scattered near the trail? That they sometimes buried obsolete equipment rather than hold it out? Some of it was probably harmless. But what if some of it wasn't? What if that thing they buried wasn't junk or trash or a robot for labs? What if it was sealed for a reason? I've never gone back to that stretch of the Pennine Way. I still hike, still camp, but I keep it to the lakes. Well-trodden areas, and I always bring a proper torch. Sometimes late at night, I still hear that metallic clang in my head like something waking up under 6 feet of earth. This happened when I was 15 near Alanquin Park. My father and I were driving up to our cottage in the middle of winter. I was always so amazed at the beauty of Alanquin Park at Muskoka and had grown up enjoying the beauty of it every summer. Our cottage was on a large lake, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. There were probably thousands of cottages on the lake. During the summer, the lake and the town's population tripled. It was cottage country, so people would spend all summer enjoying the lake and warm nights around campfires with family and friends. I spent every summer there growing up, and it still brings fond memories of sunshine and laughter and the sound of motorboats on the lake. But the winters were different. The people that didn't live there all year would venture back home to the city life, leaving the area mostly deserted with cottages boarded up for the winter. There were a few people that would still frequently come up every couple months for a few days or so, but for the most part, the lake was silent during the winters, and the town was just filled with locals. The beautiful pine trees are always covered with snow, making the forest quiet. Our cottage was on a dead-end road. There were about 20 other cottages on the road, with ours being somewhat in the middle. The cottages were quite spaced out, however, with our closest neighbors being too far away to see through the trees. My dad had needed to head up to the cottage to do some painting that my mom had been bugging him to do. It was at the end of February, and it was a long weekend, so I tacked along so he wouldn't be alone, and we could spend some quality time together. It was about a 5-hour drive from our home, but turned out to be an 8-hour drive due to the heavy snow. It had gotten dark out quite early, and it was around midnight as we drove through Alanquin Park. It was deadly quiet and pitch black, except for the headlights of the car. We finally passed through the park with only about 30 minutes left to get to the cottage. It had stopped snowing and we were both eager to get there. As we turned onto the familiar road, I remember my dad cursing. It hadn't been plowed yet. This wasn't surprising. However, it probably wouldn't be until later the next day that we would even see a snowplow. As we drove down the road, I noticed there was a fresh set of tire tracks. The Smiths must be up for the weekend, my dad had said. All of a sudden, as we drove around the bend, following the tire tracks, the headlights of a car shone in a white van that was parked on the side of the road. It was almost hidden by the vast trees that were covered with snow. "What the?" my dad mumbled. As we drove past the white van, I remember looking back through the back window and very clearly seeing 2 figures in the front seat, illuminated by our retreating taillights. I told my dad this, and he shrugged. "Maybe they're lost." I nodded, but couldn't help to think about how it was a dead-end road and why they would feel the need to park there. As we pulled into our driveway, we started bringing our stuff in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about the van and why it was parked there with 2 people just sitting in the dark in the middle of the night. It spooked me so much that I begged my dad to let me sleep upstairs with him instead of sleeping downstairs in the room my sister and I usually shared. It had big windows with no blinds that looked out into the blackness of the forest, and my 15-year-old self was already scared of the dark. Even without seeing the white fan dot, it wasn't a big deal when my sister was there, but not tonight. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. My dad had turned all the lights off, and I was just using a small lamp next to the couch to try and get through one last chapter before bed. It was so quiet, I could almost hear my ears ringing. I also started to get the feeling that I was being watched. The living room had large windows also with no curtains that overlooked the lake, and it was black except for a light or 2 from the cottages across the lake. I shut off the lamp and got up. Now that the cottage was dark, the moon was shining brightly, illuminating the snow. It was beautiful, and I walked towards the window to get a better look. Movement caught my eye, and I remember my heart dropping as I saw 2 figures down by the back porch below the window, barely hidden by the surrounding trees. I dropped to the floor and crawled towards the bedroom where my dad was sleeping, my heart in my throat. I wasn't sure if they'd seen me or not. I woke my dad up, and by the time he got to the window, the 2 figures were gone, where I had seen. The figures, 2 sets of footprints in the snow, led back around to the front of the cottage and back down the driveway. I begged my dad not to go outside. He double-checked the locks and turned on the porch lights, hopefully to scare anyone off. My dad wasn't as freaked out as I was, but still set the alarm before he headed back to bed. I remember being very freaked out, and I lay there all night, next to my dad, terrified I'd look out the window and see someone staring back at me. The next morning, my dad went outside and confirmed that there were 2 sets of footprints, leading from the road to behind our cottage, and then back around, to the front of the cottage and back up to the road. There were tire marks that showed the vehicle had turned around and then gone back up to the main road. My dad guessed that they were probably looking to break in and steal stuff, as it was in the middle of the winter and not too many people were up at the lake. But they knew we were there. They would have seen our tracks leading to our cottage, and my dad's car parked out front. They also may have seen the lamp I turned on to read, or seeing it go off. My dad didn't have an answer to that. And after much back and forth, he called the non-emergency line and reported it. Apparently, there had been some break-ins in the area, and some stuff had been stolen from the cottages that were boarded up for the winter. But again, and I still wonder, to this day, why would they be interested in stealing from a house that clearly has people inside of it? This is something that I've thought about for over 20 years. When I was a teenager, I stumbled onto something that's haunted me ever since. This was the summer of 2001. I was 14, growing up in north central Oregon, a logging town that's not even on most maps. Most of the land behind our neighborhood was leased by a private company for logging, but no one really enforced the no trespassing rules unless you were poaching deer. That summer, a group of 4 of us were trying to follow a tri-creek bed we hadn't explored before. It twisted through heavy second-growth forest and eventually opened into a small clearing we didn't recognize. Tucked into the far edge of that clearing was an old farm. From a distance, it looked like something out of an old western 2-story farmhouse. Rusted metal roof, a barn with half its roof caved in, and fencing that was mostly collapsed. It didn't look burnt or storm damaged, just like everyone had left a long time ago. We were curious, and more than a little dumb, so we checked it out. The front door was unlocked. Inside, it was like someone had left in the middle of the day and just never came back. The living room had furniture, a dusty TV set, a few kids' toys in a woven basket. Magazines from the summer of 1968 were still on the coffee table. A pair of reading glasses were sitting next to them, like someone had just taken them off. The dishes were in the sink, cans and boxed food in the pantry, jars of preserves lined the shelves. Most had burst or leaked, but some were still intact. One bedroom had sheets on the bed and a suitcase on the floor that was half packed. The closet still had clothes. Everything was old, decaying, and dusty, but it was all there. The weirdest part, it wasn't vandalized. No broken windows, no trash, no graffiti. It was like the place had just been sealed away. Outside the barn was full of old tools, a rusty pickup truck, and animal skeletons. Goats, pigs, even what looked like a horse. They were all long dead, bones dry, and picked clean. It looked like they just starved or been left behind. We didn't see anything like blood or bullet holes, but we all felt off, unsettled, like we shouldn't be there. After an hour, we left. The thing that really stuck with me was how sudden it felt. People don't leave mid-meal. They don't abandon full pantries and half-packed bags. Something happened. We just didn't know what. We tried to go back a few months later, but we couldn't find it again. I know how that sounds, but the logging roads out there change. Trails get overgrown, and none of us thought to bring a compass or GPS the first time. Years later, I was in college. I was bored and started Googling, trying to find old land records from the area. I came across a forum post from a local historian who mentioned a missing family from that same area in the late 60s. Parents and 2 kids. No police report. No formal investigation. Just gone. A neighbor reported them missing, but there wasn't enough evidence to treat it like a crime. The land was eventually marked as abandoned and sold off to the timber company. There was one comment under the post from someone claiming to be a relative of the family, saying the whole thing was buried quietly by the county, that no one wanted to talk about what might have happened. Then that comment was deleted a few days later. I've searched for more information, but there's barely anything. No news articles, no missing person flyers archived online, just that one mention and what we saw that day. I don't know what happened out there. A murder-suicide, forced disappearance, something criminal hidden behind rural silence and red tape. Who knows? But what I do know is that entire family vanished. And that house, with everything left behind, felt like it was waiting for someone to come back. But no one ever did. I was backpacking with my dog, and about 12 miles from the road and trailhead. So pretty far from people, though popular enough that other hikers might be around. But we saw no one all day. At about 2 a.m., my dog started this really low, deep growl and wakes me up. I turn on my headlamp and see his teeth showing, and he's right on top of me. I hear heavy footsteps, a black bear, or moose maybe, near the tent. I leash my dog so he doesn't tear through the tent, and the footsteps move further away, but keep circling my tent. All of my food and toiletries are hung in a tree in a bear bag. There's nothing in the tent to draw a bear's attention. One clap. My hands. Something is still slowly circling. Not something a moose would do, and a bear might, if he wanted food. But I've got nothing, and a really big dog with me. I decided to step out of the tent with a leash in one hand, and bear spray in the other, yelling, "Hey, bear." The footsteps stop. The dog's nose is in the air, telling me to look right, but nothing in my headlamp that I can see. I didn't hear anything run off, but it's quiet. I give it 5 minutes or so, get back in the tent, and it starts up again, slowly circling, maybe 50 feet from me. Maybe an hour later, I hear the footsteps wander off into the woods at dawn. I take the dog and the bear spray and start looking for tracks. I find a clear path in the leaves that had been trampled, but no tracks. The dog's nose is on the ground, and I follow his lead, and he follows the loop around the campsite. We finally see a few human footprints. No shoe tracks. A regular size, not Bigfoot, bare human foot. Plus, yeah, human feel matter and toilet paper. Some was wandering around in the middle of nowhere, near the tent, and circling it for an hour or more, and decided to use the bathroom, for me to find. This happened yesterday. My brother and I went for a hike to stave off cabin fever from self-isolating. We chose a pretty remote trail to lower the risk of coming into contact with other people. I was walking ahead of my brother, and the gravel on the track was making our footsteps sound really loud. Deep in thought, I was listening to the rhythm of his footsteps behind me. About 20 minutes in, I started hearing other footsteps, starting off faint and getting louder until they were the same pitch as his. But they were much faster, like a running rhythm. They suddenly came to a halt, and I could hear the motion of someone stopping on gravel. That sudden, sharp, rocky sound, if you can imagine it. I assumed there must just be someone running or jogging on the track. And sure enough, I saw a shadow to the side of me appear, which looked like a person's head next to mine, as though they were right behind me. I stopped and turned around to let them pass, because the track was narrow. However, when I turned around, it was just my brother staring back at me. He was confused as to why I'd stopped. So, I asked if he was running a second ago, and he said no. I asked if there had been anyone behind him, and he said that he wasn't aware of anyone. I thought it was strange, but just let it go, and carried on. About 5 minutes later, we came around a corner, and there was this smell of just pure death. Like a really strong off-meat smell. We figured it was a dead animal, and kept going. We reached the hike lookout about 20 minutes later, chilled out for a bit, then headed back. We passed the death smell, and then around the exact same spot where it had happened before. I started hearing the running sounds again. I ignored it this time because it was starting to freak me out, and I just picked up the pace to get back to the car. I told my mom, and she joked that the smell of death must have been a dead jogger, and I was being haunted by them, to which I laughed at the time, but now I'm wondering what if it was. Maybe I should have investigated the smell. It was a humid night in July, when 3 buddies and I were camping in a small spot by a river. That night, alcohol and weed were flowing. It was around 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. when we were all cracking jokes and having a good time sitting around the fire when one of my friends went quiet and had a weird look on his face. So, I asked him what's up, thinking that he's not feeling good or just needs to lay down. But he responded saying that he feels like someone is watching us. So, I told him that everything's going to be okay and just to relax, and if he wants, he can sleep in the truck. Well, later that night, we all went into our tents and I instantly passed out. But I was woken up by my friend who I was sharing the tent with. He was sitting up with his pocket knife out. I asked him what was going on and he told me to just listen, which I did. And I heard leaves crunching and branches breaking and listening for a bit longer. It sounded like someone with boots walking around. I got concerned because none of my friends were wearing any boots. After laying there for a while, the footsteps stopped right next to the tent, and we saw a figure standing there as we were trying to figure out what we should do. Our best idea was to jump out of the tent and ambush whoever this was. It sounded like a good idea at the time, so my buddy and I jumped out of the tent, and we were faced with a 6'5", 280 pounds man with an unkempt beard and hair. After standing in front of the man for a second, my friend took off running towards the truck, and me trying to clumsily follow. I crashed into the tent where my other 2 friends were sleeping. As I was laying on the ground, in fear, I saw that the man was holding a machete. So, I yelled, "Get the gun." He didn't have a gun, it was just a bluff. Well, my bluff worked, and the man dropped his machete and took off into the woods. We didn't hesitate and instantly packed up and went to the truck. After going back to the house to calm down and get a bit more sleep, the next morning we all went back to the spot fully armed for anything. Once we got to the spot, we found the machete, and after following the tracks for a bit, we also found a small axe. We all agreed to never go back to that spot or talk about what happened again. Back when I was 14 years old, my family had moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here, and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border colleague Maisie, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I can't quite recall the reason why, but maybe it was because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't. Or because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven, I always came home with horrific blisters. Although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside of one of the nearby towns where I went to school, there was a public forest. Because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Maisie there, drop us off, and then pick us up again 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always quiet, only with the occasional family, dog, walker, or jogger passing us by. On one particular evening, I'd gone back to these woods with Maisie, where my dad would later pick us up after running some errands, making our way along the trail. The evening had already started to dim, wanting to make my way back to the car park before it got too dark. I decided to take a shortcut through the forest via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, Maisie and I stumbled upon a small teepee-shaped hut made from logs. Loving a good game of hide-and-seek, I would sometimes hide inside this teepee when Maisie wasn't looking. where she would spend the next couple of minutes circling around the hut trying to find me, not realizing she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Maisie that day, I'm not sure. But following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange instant feeling about this man. Even though I had only just noticed him, I can't remember or even describe the way this man was walking, but by the way he did so, felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instincts, or perhaps just my paranoia, I quickly latched my lead back onto Maisie and hurriedly make my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I'd reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already turned much darker again. Turning to see if the man was behind me, I could still see him around the curve, only 10 meters away from me now. I did try to tell myself I was just being paranoid and this man was most likely not following me, but my gut instinct still told me something was off. Thinking ahead, I pulled out my phone to call my dad as to make sure he was already in the car park waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I just assumed he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped my dad was nearly on his way. By the time I make it back to the car park, it was basically pitch black by now, and there was just one single car in the parking area, but it wasn't my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope he would be coming soon, and that this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him pass by, I try to distract myself on my phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me. Entering the car park, the man then gets in his vehicle, the only car in the car park, but he doesn't drive away. He just stays there, sat inside his car with both the engine and headlights turned on. 20 minutes must have gone by, but my dad still wasn't here. And yet, this very same stranger was trying to call and text my dad to say I was waiting for him, and I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me. And for those whole 20 minutes, or however many more minutes, I sat outside those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxious was that my dog Maisie had been endlessly whining by my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Maisie was, in general, a very nervous dog and basically winded everything, but perhaps she too felt as though something about this situation wasn't right. Thankfully, after what felt like far longer than 20 or so minutes, the strange man, already with his engine and headlights on, reverses from his parking spot, exits out of the car park and onto the main road, leaving Maisie and I in peace. Although we were now alone, basically stranded outside of a dark forest, I couldn't help but feel a huge sigh of relief come over me. My dad did eventually come get us. 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. Do you know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot he had to come pick us up. I don't know if the man really was following me through the forest, and I definitely don't know why he just sat in his car for 20 minutes. But if I had to learn anything from that experience, it would be the following. 1. My dad can sometimes be a careless douche, and 2. Never hike through the forest alone late in the evening. So this happened when I was about 17 during summer break. My friend and I went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house was his grandparents', and the whole place felt really isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night, we'd stay up late, just sitting by the water, listening to the kind of deafening silence you only get in the countryside, and talking for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So, she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try to hitch a ride. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we started walking. When we got there, it was midweek and no cars passed at all. Most people were still at work in the city. As it got later, we decided to just walk back. On the way back, we passed through a few neighboring villages that were half abandoned. Honestly, it was pretty creepy, but we kept ourselves entertained by singing and joking around to keep the fear at bay. It was getting dark, and we still had about 4 miles left. Then, we ended up on this road with dense forest on both sides. Suddenly, we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark and really unsettling. We tried to joke about it, but deep down we all felt something was off. Then my friend pointed, and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit, until one of us nervously said, "Must be some wild fireflies messing with us." We laughed, but we all knew those definitely weren't fireflies. This was before cell phones, so there was no way to call anyone. We just had to keep moving and get back safely. As we got closer to the village, 2 of us heard a female voice coming from the forest. We looked at each other, both realizing we heard it, while the third friend was talking and didn't notice. I got goosebumps. It sounded so real, and the fact that I wasn't the only one who heard it made it even creepier. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house. Here's where it gets even weirder. In Slavic folklore, there's not just the lay, the forest spirit, who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the rusalka. Rusalki are these mythological female spirits, often connected to lakes and rivers. They're usually described as beautiful women with long hair, sometimes said to lure people, especially at night, with their singing or voices. We'd been hanging out at the lake so many nights, and then to hear a mysterious female voice coming from the trees. Later on, it definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down we all know we saw and heard something we can't explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest and strangest experiences of my life. And yeah, I still think about those nights at the lake, and wonder what might have been watching or listening to us from the darkness.